evening.
Good evening.
Welcome to the work session for April 1st, 2021. It's 5:02. I guess I'll go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Spence for the items of information.
All right, we'll start with our COVID-19 update. Dr. Whitehead.
Yes, sir. So good afternoon. I have a few updates, and then certainly any questions that you may have. Some of it today is beyond kind of what we typically start with the transmission rates and those kinds of things. But the pieces for updates, the vaccine clinic that we ran for staff, we had a Friday afternoon, and Saturday, after it opened up for educators, we had 400 people come through our clinics with our school nurses that had been trained and the DPH staff that were there to support us. I did a follow-up survey with staff because some people opted to take a 2-dose vaccine from another provider. And we currently have, I had 940, 940 responses. 667 of those responses indicated that the staff members had taken advantage of a vaccine for COVID-19. And out of those, 411 are teachers or parapros that have gotten some form of vaccine. It was interesting. I shared with Cabinet earlier this week that almost as soon as responses started coming in, the one percentage that didn't change a lot was the percentage that have said they have decided they don't plan at this time to get a vaccine, and that's hovered right at about 28.6%. And that includes everybody who responded to the survey, and it could have included district staff, transportation, maintenance. We had participation from all those areas to come up with the 940 responses to the survey.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
So of the people surveyed, does that include the 400 that we know?
Yes.
Okay, so everybody got the survey.
Yes.
Thank you.
Because that, like I said, I knew we would have people that had made a decision to get a different type of vaccine other than the Johnson & Johnson, which was offered at that point. In Glynn County, the Glynn County Health Department has administered 25,283 doses in Glynn County. They are working to see if they can get me a number of other providers that have given the vaccine within Glynn County, so that I could give you an update just to kind of give you a bigger picture. But at this point in time, that is the amount that the Department of Public Health has administered. That includes our 400 doses. And those are automatically, the day of the administration, they enter their information directly into GRITS, which is the Georgia Registry for Immunizations. I've checked, our school nurses already have access to that information, so that's helpful for us to have available to us. On the side of it opening up to 16 and 17-year-olds in the last short while, I sent information to the schools yesterday just to provide some clarification because I was getting questions about what that meant for a 16 or 17-year-old as far as contact tracing and those kinds of things related if they determined to get the vaccine. The information that I shared, that they have given me information that they're going to share that with all their parents and students as well, and I included GICA in that communication, is that 16 and 17-year-olds right now are the only approved vaccine for them is the Pfizer vaccine. It's a 2-dose vaccine that has a 21-day time span between the first and the second dose. And with any vaccine for COVID-19, you're not considered fully vaccinated until 2 weeks after your last dose. And so for a lot of those students, that's really going to take us to the very end of the school year for this school year. For it to impact not having to go home if they have a direct exposure. But if they do meet that 2-week threshold after their final dose and they have a direct exposure, unless they have symptoms, then they will not be required to isolate or quarantine again. So that's information for them on the vaccines that we have.
So the 25,000, that was only from the Department of Health?
Yes,
That's
sir.
not from the hospital or anything?
That's right.
So there can be considerably more.
Yes, yes. The fine arts updates that we have, through some recent releases and some research, we were able to identify some musicians' masks that met the thresholds for some of the safety concerns, and some different bell covers that they could use on the instruments. And so we've placed a system order. All of the schools, the middle schools and high schools, participated in submitting information for an order. So those are coming on board. And then we actually found out yesterday that with some of the CARES Act money that's set aside for learning loss, we could actually identify performing arts in those areas for learning loss. And so we'll be able to offer summer programming for summer camps, for lack of a better way of looking at it, if the schools choose to take advantage of that to bring in students to get them caught up on some of the performing arts pieces that they haven't had all year to participate in. And so that would be kind of a new option, kind of an enrichment opportunity for students over the summer, and for those areas that have not traditionally had a summer program that we've paid for. So that's actually an option for us, and that information went out to schools yesterday. There have been some questions recently too, some communications from some parents asking questions too. And I just wanted to give you kind of an update that our playground options opened up on September 16th. And so many of our schools have had playground usage since that point in time. Some of the thresholds around usage depended on the level of transmission in that school. And so we had certain guidance that went along with it as far as the number of cases they were seeing and what restrictions they may need to have as a result of that for a class or a grade level. But the playgrounds have been opened as an option for the schools since September 16th. We have field days and egg hunts that are currently in progress. We had a lot of field days start yesterday. I sent out some general guidance to schools to consider in their planning. They submitted plans, we had feedback, and so just happy to say that so far principals said those things have gone well and have been well received at their schools. We'll have egg hunts, I think, tomorrow with pre-K. Ms. Thompson worked to develop that plan so it would be consistent across all pre-K classrooms, and then any other elementary schools following with that activity, we're going to use her plan for that as well. Also, since we met, there's been a CDC update for schools on 3 feet distancing to try to get schools opening back up in places that they haven't been open yet. And when you read into that guidance, it also lets you know that that 3 feet update applies when mask mandates are in place, that flexibility is afforded to the schools in those areas. But the one thing that it didn't change was the identification of direct exposures. So that distance is still 6 feet. So still within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more is a direct exposure. Just that they had relaxed on some of that guidance. And I will say that kind of early on in our school year, because we were mandating masks, we also had committed that we were distancing to the extent possible. But we knew in some of our classes we couldn't fully get the 6 feet, but because we were complying with all of the requirements and other mandates, we somewhat had gotten a little bit of flexibility already in that area here in Glynn, with the health department working with us on that. I did check as a result of that update, and the state DPH office has indicated that they do not intend to make any changes to their recommendations on masking and social distancing for schools for this semester. Vaccinations have just recently become available for school-age students 16 and older, and it is unlikely that younger adolescents and children are going to be vaccinated before the end of the year. So maintaining these preventive measures is going to be important, and that's just a statement from the state DPH on that area. And I think those give me updates since we last met about any of the changes. And I'll just say as well, you know, I try to do the research and find out what all the implications are from those things. I try to keep my personal opinion out of it because ultimately, and I've mentioned before, my goal every day is for us to be able to keep school open. Our trends have shown us that for us, following a school break or closure where students are not in the structured environment of school, we typically see an increase of cases afterwards. And for us, that means that after spring break, we're only going to be a couple of weeks out from students testing. And not that it's all about testing, but we do have students that are going to be graduating this year who need to complete their EOCs and take their AP exams to have those posted to their transcript in time for college admissions and all those things. And so I would hate for us to think about jeopardizing their option to be able to test because they have an exposure or other things that would be because of practices that we've changed. And so that's update, and I'm happy to have any questions or feedback on those updates.
Can you clarify what you were saying about the 3 feet rule, but then it's not different for direct exposure, it's still 6 feet? So
Mhm.
what is the 3 feet?
There were still schools, there still are many schools across the nation that haven't opened back up. And I think part of the challenge that some school systems expressed nationally was that they couldn't make 6 feet spacing work and bring kids back in person, even though there was a call for schools to reopen. And so CDC had continued to say that schools that have followed the guidelines and have reopened have done so safely and have been able to remain open. And in an effort, I think, to alleviate some of that barrier, they indicated that if you had a mask mandate in place, you could space students 3 feet apart and still be able to open safely. But what didn't change was the definition for direct exposure, which is still within 6 feet.
But for us, we knew that that wasn't possible in some of our facilities, but we were still able.
Because we had a mask mandate in place and we were following the other guidelines, and we were showing that that was still safely happening for us. So our internal data showed us that because we had all the other pieces in place and the hand washing and all those pieces, that we weren't necessarily seeing that because we had to have students sit 3 feet, that it was creating an issue.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
You gave the health department numbers of over 10,000 doses given, but that's not, did they break it down for you, the single dose versus double dose? Like Pfizer needing 10,000 would be 5,000 people?
No, I didn't get the per person, but I can do that. And now that you say that, it's interesting because I do think in one communication it was about the number of people vaccinated, but I will check as well. And the numbers through yesterday were 25,283. Yeah.
It's a hard number to hammer down because there's different ones.
Yes.
And on your next report next month, I think this is something we need to keep in the forefront each month. I'd like to know how many people got the flu and were out because of the flu.
Yeah.
I think it'll be an interesting, very small number to probably be a single digit. And compare it to the last 5 years, if you can, to known flu cases that we've had and how much time off it cost our organization.
Last 5.
Well, whatever makes a good, whatever's a good number for you to find. I don't want you to
Yeah.
spend the whole month.
Yeah. And there is some mention in here with my communications with Dr. Davis over the last 2 days of the reduced cases of not only the flu but the common cold
Yes.
that have occurred this year as well.
And the reason I say that, because those kind of reports really give you a better insight on a byproduct of the wearing of the masks. The mandate and what we're doing is to protect the community today. But what it's also doing is slowing down a lot of that, which is a good thing. So we need to look at all the benefits as people like to look at all the negatives. So, kind of put it on the same page is what I'm trying to do. So,
Okay.
thank you for that.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions for Dr. Whitehead?
So your recommendation right now is to not do anything different from here on out?
Well, at least at this point in time, and again, part of that consideration for me is that thinking into May, which we're going to be hitting that time frame of right after spring break of when students would be transmitting for any activities they've had over spring break. So that 14-day period after spring break is going to be critical for us to know what kind of impact it's going to have. I mean, I think many people are so ready to be back to normal, that would probably be like the easy, but I'm afraid of the impact it would have, particularly on our graduating seniors. I'm concerned about their ability to be able to participate in those assessments that are going to count towards what needs to be posted to their transcript. And while, you know, there are some waivers and things out for EOC, AP, those things have to be processed in time for those kids to get that kind of credit. And so that's the whole month of May for the high school is either an AP or an EOC test almost every day of May. And that's just my concern of relaxing at this point.
It's a good thought. I mean, it makes sense.
Do we know if, based on the chart that Dr. Spencer just sent out, I mean, there are a lot of schools on there in our RESA, and I didn't count. I mean, maybe 50% didn't have a mask mandate. Maybe it's not that high. Maybe 30, 40% didn't have a mandate at all. Do we know? And I haven't heard anything in the news, but I don't, you know, get Effingham County's news or Ware County or anything else. Do we know how they've been doing without it? I mean, if they've had major cases. I mean, it seems like if they had, you would hear about it, you know, out of Savannah or something. But I haven't heard that any system that is not wearing masks is having a much bigger issue that we're having, if you will.
Yeah,
You may not have gotten that information.
Ware
from.
County, I know they had to shut down a school and they had to shut down a wing. I'm not sure about Effingham County.
They did have to shut down at least one wing I know of.
And I know that some of the smaller counties like Tattnall County and
Right.
Idea City Schools, they've had to shut down because they didn't have enough teachers. Not necessarily the whole school, but wings. But I'm not sure that had anything to do with masks because we have a smaller setting, it could have occurred for us too. We
And-
haven't had to shut down a wing and we haven't had to shut down a school. But I'm not aware of anything at Effingham County.
The other piece of that we could go back and also add to that information would be their community transmission. You know, here in Glynn, we've had several hot times in our county, but I don't know what their transmission rates have looked like in their system. And that's part of the CDC guidance that they updated March 19th, indicates some of the other information about taking into consideration for elementary versus middle and high, the use of the community transmission. With elementary, they're saying if you have, and their wording is universal and correct use of masks and physical distancing. For elementary, they're saying those prevention strategies, regardless of your transmission rate, seem to be very effective. When you get to middle and high, if you have a high transmission rate, they're saying that there's more of a risk with those age populations, even with the layered strategies. But those pieces they say to consider as well is your community transmission rate.
And I think it was 9 to 8 is what it was. It was really close to 50-50.
Through all the contact tracing numbers that are out there, do we know a percentage of, and it's probably not perfect, don't get me wrong, I understand it's not going to be, you can't catch everything, but do we know a percentage of our positive cases that have been contracted at school? Does that make sense? So, I know we're doing, you know, if somebody tests positive, you quarantine and everything else, but do we know the percentage of kids that we think contract? I mean, I assume they're getting pretty good at getting back to where it started for a family or whatever else. Okay, you took a trip or you went to a funeral or whatever it was. Do we know, based on however many cases we've had, do we know what percentage that has been? Is it 0? Is it 5%?
I know it's not 0,
Right,
but I don't have the exact percentage, and there seem to be some other variables at play. So once we start looking into it, I mean, I've had settings where, you know, 3/4 of the kids in the setting have ended up positive, and there doesn't seem to be another source. But when I look into it further, it dealt with some other variables that were happening in that classroom. So it's hard to just pinpoint it just to contact tracing alone or just the regular practices alone. I don't think it's a very high percentage that have had to, go through complete isolation. Another interesting turn in some of that data was actually when we had the change for second semester that came out to us in December about allowing students to test to come back early from a quarantine. And we've had more than what I think some expected on those testing on day 6 or 7 to come back on day 8 that have tested positive without symptoms. And that before, we wouldn't have tested them as long as they didn't have symptoms, and they would have just showed back up. They would have shown back up on day 15. But with that option to return early, we ended up with an increase in numbers that way.
I got just a couple of things, some insight to share about from what I do to how I relate that to this. The issue is not so much that a kid is going to get sick from it. The issue is keeping it in the community and spreading it to the weak and the feeble. I worked at the hospital 23 years. We've had ICUs of 24 beds for 22 years. Now we have 36 beds, and we consistently still are full. So regardless of the data or however many people have COVID that are in the ICUs, it's causing a significant problem with very sick people. And so if a 17-year-old goes home and gives it to their grandmother, which is the biggest thing that I say, and it's the biggest thing that I see, and their grandmother just doesn't have the ability to feel, and it just hits them, and it has a bad result, we'll put it that way. And then you see a lot of Facebook posts saying, hey, they can't make us do a mask, blah, 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 and then you hear other people put on there, please, I believe that same thing, and then my grandmother died, please just don't put that. So there's a lot of passion about it, but the reality is the numbers, and that's something that you can't change. ICU is bigger now, 33% bigger, and it's still full. So it is my opinion that we continue doing what we're doing for our due diligence and the recommendations of the medical community who actually knows and does the research and sees what we're doing. I know it's difficult. I know it feels like a thumb, people trying to make you, but it really is making a difference. Our numbers currently today are a single digit within the hospital. A single digit. It hasn't been like that in a very good while. So what we're doing is working. Let's not stop till we finish this year. That's my opinion. So sorry, long-winded.
And I'll also just add anecdotally as well. I know you all hear, from people who definitely want to see changes on things, but I also have gotten a good bit of feedback, and I've shared this with Dr. Spence as well, that I've had major employers in this area who have said they are grateful that we've had specific guidelines because it's allowed school to be open. That's their impression, and that their employees have been able to come to work because school is open. So, and I've had other parents and others just express that, they realize it's a hassle, and they feel for teachers that have to remind kids to put masks up and those things. But I have actually gotten that kind of feedback on top of some of the other negative pieces too.
Do you have do you have the number on the community transmission index?
I think today, or as of Monday or yesterday, I think we were at 124. They've reduced the calculations to once a week, and I think we were at 124.
Thank you.
Are you willing to kind of look at it again, after spring break? I mean, I don't know how many days after we get back do we normally see the spikes, the increases.
I would say probably within that 14-day window, we're going to see how this is going to start spreading, if we have a spread.
And we've all been in the community, right? So, you can already see it at the grocery store. And it's like, it used to be 80-90% compliance. Now it's 40-50% compliance. So I wonder, how that's going to impact the community. And I agree. It's been difficult. Y'all have done a great job. Our teachers have too. And the kids, I know it's been tough. But, like I said in my email back up here, there is such thing as a greater good. I believe in that, and it's been a really rough time for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. 'Cause I guess without rehashing my whole text thread this morning, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Okay, so if we're gonna do this right and wear masks and all that kind of stuff, we need to do it. Okay, so That's all I would ask. Okay, let's be consistent and, make sure that we're all following the guidelines and there's not special treatment based on anything or whatever else. You know what I'm saying?
I understand.
So, anyway, that's all I ask. Because when you see, yeah, again, when you see Facebook posts with, you know, kids at events with no mask or anything, you know what I mean? So, it kind of flies in the face of what we're sitting there talking about. Valerie, you and I sitting there talking about this,
Right.
and the world's going on around us, right? And nobody's masking at this game or this event or this pageant or whatever else. So, I'm glad that we can do those things. That's what we're fighting for, to get out back and do those things.
That's right.
But it's difficult to tell one group you can do something and another group you can't. And so,
Well, we're mainly talking about inside of our school facilities. The inside of our school facilities is what we're really controlling, that situation. And I'm actually thinking about allowing the kids who are outside changing class. What I'm worried about is when we start changing classes at Glynn Academy in May, it's going to be very hot.
right.
And so I'm actually thinking about outside, especially during class change, that the kids can put their mask down and walk to their class. It's only a 5-minute period, so there is no direct exposure. So I think that's something that we could possibly do, because we're not seeing things happen from outdoors. We're seeing if it's happening, it's happening indoors.
But to what Mike's saying, if you do that for Glynn Academy and you don't do that for Brunswick
Well,
High,
Brunswick High has outdoor also, their courtyard, and they change that way, or coming into the school.
in the middle schools and the elementary
Outside
schools.
recess, yeah, I would do the same thing. If they're outside, they could take their mask off, but not on our school buses, not inside the building. That's what I would like to recommend. Because I'm not seeing things happen outdoors, like you're talking about the big crowds. We're not seeing that spread that way. It's all indoors. That's what, I want to look at what happens when we come back and then consider outside.
I'm with Mike 100% to what's good for the goose is good for the
I
gander.
agree.
All
I
schools
agree.
the same and, you know, be as consistent across the board as possible.
And I realize I'm the superintendent and that's my fault, and I will handle that. I have no problem with that.
Is there any way, whenever we're looking at all this data, whenever we come back after 2 weeks, also consider the very small portion of transmission, I guess, whenever we had direct exposure for being within the 6-foot range? Because that was the biggest problem I had, is the fact we're quarantining all these students, and it's like less than 0.1% that are actually getting sick. Now, I know in some cases you may have 2 or 3, but they may be on the bus or maybe taking their mask off. But in the classroom setting, I feel like it doesn't support sending all these kids home. And you're talking about EOCs, you're talking about you know, graduation, all this stuff. I would like to look at that and say, is this something that the board would even consider? If we're wearing our mask, we're doing our due diligence, we're doing everything we can do we have to keep quarantining kids? That would be what I'd like to look at.
The reason you're quarantining the kids is just because if somebody doesn't have any kind of reaction whatsoever, doesn't mean that they're not exposed and they're not a carrier. That's the data that you don't pick up in the social distancing when a group does get together. You could catch it and take it and never get tested and then take it to your family. But you never got tested, but you were exposed. So you do have the potential to be a carrier, but you're never going to show symptoms. And that's the data that's not caught.
Right.
So,
Well, just for my sake, I see that we have data that we're catching, and it's saying that the transmission is so low. To me, it's not even really a risk. It's less than 1/10 of a percentage, I believe, from the last time. I could be wrong with this. I'm just saying, can we look at it and see? Because my biggest problem is we quarantine, I don't know, thousands of kids probably. And of those 1,000, maybe 5 have actually had a symptom or developed a symptom. Who's saying some of those percentages weren't picked up from a family member or outside? I'm just thinking that we're quarantining way too many kids, and we've made it this far. And I mean, we're at the goal line for these kids to get the EOCs and everything else. If they're quarantined for wearing their masks or doing their job, and we're punishing them, that's just kind of based on the data that I'm seeing. I understand what you're saying, but based on our data and what we review, that's what I'd like to look at. Now, everybody else can be against it, that's fine. I just want to kind of look at it and see.
well, I'm not against it.
Yeah.
I was just trying to explain why that data is inaccurate.
Right.
Can we see what we look like coming out of spring break?
I'd say maybe,
Before we make any
oh, for sure.
That's all I ask. I would like to see what happens coming out of spring break, because every holiday we've had, we've seen it up.
Well, spring break for all the colleges started, 2 weeks ago, so you may start seeing upticks, especially with St. Simon's and Jekyll Island and some of the places that are visited, so we may start seeing a little bit here and there, because people are coming from all over the place, so I think you're correct.
Thank
John?
you, Dr. Whitehead.
And I don't know the answer to this, and I mean, you hear people talk about these studies about the mask not being effective at all, whatever, and I believe that some aren't. I think the material, that's just my layman's opinion, but, I mean, if you're wearing, if both people are wearing a mask and you're positive right now, okay, and we both have our mask on, and we sit here together for an hour, you know, what's the likelihood when we're both masking that you're gonna transmit that to me? Because we've been masking in the classrooms the whole time. You know, what's the, I'm trying to put you on the spot, I'm trying to understand, you know.
With both of us
Well,
sitting here with a
we're-
mask, what are the chances?
Right.
Much less. The actual data is all over the place, from 20% to 5% to 3%. There's lots of different studies, and there's nothing that's exact. But the one thing that is there is you do have a lesser chance to get it. That is a consistent, but the actual number is not.
Yeah, there's like a certain percentage in a lot of the studies with the one person wearing a mask, and then the increase for the
It's
both
two.
people wearing the mask. And that was kind of another interesting aside that Dr. Davis had in some communication this week, is that in none of this has there been like this, you know, blind, you know, two-sided control group, whatever kind of study, because they're just not going to do that with humans and something that's deadly, you know. But so it's hard to truly define the effectiveness, but I've read similar as high as 30% for just one person, you know, and then both people having it on, reducing that, you know, like up to 60%. So it varies, I think.
It's all over.
Thank you.
Would you like for me to do the Infinite Campus while I'm in here?
Yes, while you're doing that.
Under proposed action items, I do have the annual renewal for Infinite Campus for FY22 that's on there. This would be billed out when the PO's open for FY22. That attachment is provided there to show you. Again, I think everyone in this room has had children to go through, or family members, so you're familiar with Infinite Campus as our student information system. And one of the pieces that we added this past school year, in coordination with a lot of our remote learning and virtual support through Google Classroom, is the campus learning piece that allows a sync between Infinite Campus and Google Classroom that helps that efficiency in there. So I would ask that you review that renewal. That's a part of the budget for $120,724.90.
Is this any more or less than previous?
It is more in the sense of adding campus learning, but our FTE is actually down some, so some of the overall cost is smaller because of they bill us based on our FTE.
It allows us for FA Campus to talk to Google Classroom.
Right, I mean, I think in today's time, that's absolutely needed.
Yeah, so when you see the campus learning on there, that's that additional piece.
For what it's worth, I talked to Ben about it on the way to school this morning about the mask issue, and he polled the classroom, the fifth graders, and they, you know,
What'd they say?
no mask.
No mask?
No. And I've had teachers that have had COVID that say no mask. You know, they're just kind of over it. And you know, you're coming in the classroom and you've got a mask on, but you're touching and moving and you're using the same sink and you're trying to keep things clean. But you know, I think that's where a lot of people are with it right now. They, you know, wonder. Like the question I had is, you know, we've all been masking how effective it's going to be. So we'll try to stick it out. Look at it after spring break, I guess.
Okay. Thank
Dr.
you.
Whitehead.
Thank you.
Next, I have Ms. Lewis and a gifted program update.
That's difficult.
Andrea, oh, Ms. Preston, I'm sorry. I can't read without my glasses. Ms. Preston.
Okay, so I have a FY22 budget, preliminary budget as much as possible, but I want to go over that after we go over the financial report for February. So the state did the midterm adjustment for our QBE money, and even though we lost 483 FTEs. The state gave all districts a hold harmless amount of money, so what we lost in FTE, they plugged it in on a different line item, and so we didn't lose money from losing students. But they also, since the revenues came in higher than what they anticipated last time this year, they thought, you know, we're going to lose money, the state's going to lose money because of COVID, yada, yada, and that just didn't happen. They actually gave us back some of the austerity that they took away from us. So we ended up picking up $2,442,600 for this school year in our QBE money. So that was a increase to the budgeted revenues in the general fund.
That's not an April Fool's joke.
Nope. You just won't believe the stuff I've got to say today. And it ain't a joke, none of it's jokes. But anyway, so the budget expenses for the general fund increased by the amount of the $600 stipend that we paid employees, and that was $1,327,700. The year-to-date revenues are on track, 83.2% of the budget. That's about where we were last year. Property taxes are coming in. I mean, we were worried, you know, they weren't going to collect them, and that's not true. Local tax receipts for February are a little at 1.6 million, and the year-to-date expenses are at 60.8, even though we're 66% through the year. So the CARES Act money, the first round of CARES Act money that we got, was $3.4 million. And we had anticipated to use that to shift general fund salaries to that grant, and it would produce a savings in the general fund of basically $3.4 million. So if you look at the financial report, you'll see where, again, salaries and fringe benefits are lagging behind where we are in the budget year because of that savings that we moved in October. Then we got our second round of CARES Act 2 of $14.4 million.
Hold on, you're right. I just want to say one thing. Our federal government is printing money right now. And in a year or two, we're going to have to pay for that. And so we need to be in a position to handle that. And so because these numbers are going to be big, but we're printing money right now. And somebody's going to have to pay for it down the road. Just know that.
And as you know, I usually come up with a plan to save money, so we'll get to that. So the 14.4 that was allocated in January, I think it was, we're going to do the same thing with part of that 14.4 million. About 6 million of that is going to be general fund salaries and benefits. I'm going to move over to the federal grant, so it'll, again, produce a savings for this school year of another $6 million. We're also going to use that money for the Chromebook initiative that we did instead of using East Plus money, so that'll save money on the East Plus money for renovations. And we're going to look at rolling out the Prometheum boards. We did one rollout with East Plus money a year ago, and we're going to look at, we can use CARES Act money for the Prometheum board. So we're going to use the 14.4 for Chromebooks and Prometheum boards. And we've done some other things like masks for the band and some other things like they're eating lunches in the classrooms, and it's just overload of trash, and we bought these carts to use to get the trash and just some little things like that. But so again, you know, we're going to end up saving this about $6 million on top of the 3.4 in salaries and benefits. So when you get to the end of the school year and I do this financial report for June, you will see I did not remove those budgeted expenditures from the general fund, because next year you want to make sure you have your salaries and benefits intact to pay everybody that's in the general fund, depending on what we do with the third round of CARES Act money that initially was told to us it would be $32.2 million, and 20% of that has to be spent on loss of learning remediation. But today we got a revised allocation, and now the federal government is telling the states that you can have 65% of that money, but you have to apply for the rest of it via a grant application process. So it remains to be seen whether or not the state of Georgia, when they apply for the remaining money, will get it. But even if they don't get it, our allocation will be $20.9 million. And of that $20.9 million, we have to spend 20% on loss of learning, minimum. So we're kind of waiting to see where that ends up and what the game plan will be for that. But, basically, in the past, when we have exceeded our 15% threshold for our general fund balance, we moved it to local capital projects, and it sat there until we bought buses, or if we needed to move it back to general fund, we could. So what we're going to end up doing is, for the time being, until they come up with a plan to spend the 20% on loss of learning, and we know what our final allocation is for CARES Act 3, we will just move money to local capital projects in excess of the 15% of the fund balance. So if you look at the budget estimates that I've put out there, you'll see a line item for an operating transfer to capital projects. So if you'll come off the financial report, Chris, and go to the attachments under financial update. Okay, so we will start next school year with a $23.4 million fund balance. The budgeted revenues, I don't have any numbers from the tax assessor yet. I emailed him. He said I would get something after this, the Senate Bill 486 exemption has been processed, yada, yada. So I'm hoping that will be the end of April, and I will have something for the May board meeting to have a better understanding of what the digest is doing. And I just did a conservative 2%, but if y'all recall, last summer we had a 5.48% increase in the digest. And I live on the island, and it's crazy right now. Things are selling like hotcakes, and they were last year during COVID too. So I think 2% is probably conservative, but we'll see what happens when he gives me the numbers. So a 2% increase in the digest will generate $4.2 million if you leave the millage rate the same. And I went back up to a 98% collection rate because Mr. Chapman is collecting taxes, and we're running at about 99% collection rate. So I went back up to 98%. I'm estimating that our QBE funds, even though the state has said they are not going to hold harmless next year, we lost 483 FTEs, so we will take that loss, but they're going to potentially wipe out the whole austerity reduction. So that will offset the loss, and I think we might gain about $1 million in state funds. TRS rate, it went from 21.14 in FY20 down to 19.06 in 21, and now it's going back up to 19.81%. And that's a net cost to us of about $500,000. These are, the typical step increases I calculated. And then the new positions, at which I think Dr. Spence is going to talk to you a little bit about later. Most of these are teaching positions, not finished with staffing yet, but it looks like we're going to probably need about 2 SPED teachers. We need a social worker, a psychologist. Risley Middle has been rolling out, splitting reading and writing for the last 2 years, and this is the final year of them getting 2 more homeroom teachers to have 10, 10, and 10 for every grade level. Our gifted numbers are up. We would like to request 3 gifted teachers. We're actually going to add 4 virtual teachers at the middle school for the virtual academy, but that will be CARES Act funded. And then I'm still working on elementary school staffing, but as of right now, we need at least 2 for homerooms in elementary. So, and then I'm adding back the assistant superintendent of operations that we took out for this budget year. So right now I'm up to about 1.3 million in new positions. Then the next line item is what I talked to you about. As we're saving this money, it'll be an operating transfer out of the general fund into the capital projects fund, and that's what that line item is of 3.5 million. So this is obviously going to change depending on what happens with the digest and our state money, but
That
this is-
operating transfer to local could potentially go up to 20, 30 million.
yes. And we do have plans you have on the agenda tonight to buy buses. We're going to go ahead and replenish our 07, 08, and 09s.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
And we have plans to replenish our maintenance fleet. That's not on the board agenda tonight, but those trucks are really old. I mean, it's been years since we bought new maintenance trucks. So those are some things that we're looking at doing with the savings.
We also are looking at some increased security measures, even more so than we have now, which we could use.
So, I know, every day I come to work
So
something.
crazy.
We also got 1.8 million for the bonuses from it trickled down, from feds to the
Gas
state.
never would come and get it.
We're putting the con app in today, and we're probably going to process those checks when we get back from spring break and after y'all have a board meeting and we know who's actively working after the 12th.
Get
Can
more
you bring back-
bonuses?
$1,000 the state is giving. It ended up being pretty much all employees, but very little.
That's great.
Yeah, $1,000 for full-time, $500 for part-time.
Oh,
It's all federal money. When we got that allocation, it's given to us in a document that has everybody on it. And I looked at the bottom line of that. It was $230 million for K-12 for the state of Georgia alone. The amount of money that is flowing right now is unbelievable.
But we're gonna have to pay this back someday.
It's a credit card, it's not your bank account. Anyway,
We need to be very,
us, all of us.
So, are any questions on the financial report or budget or? I know, it's just crazy.
We need to bring back Dr. Bull's wish list thing we used to do, remember?
The PIP, no,
they
I
can
know.
spend it.
Yes, sir.
Well, I mean, I think Scott and I are on the same page in that we feel like we probably should sit on the money.
I agree.
Most of it, we definitely need to do the remediation part, loss of learning, and maybe some other stuff. I know there's some social and emotional stuff that I want to do, but there will be plenty left over to just sit on for
That's
a
a
year
lot of
or
loss of
two.
learning.
Yeah, I mean, we stayed in school.
The way they're gonna get the money back is cut. And-
Yeah.
And when they start cutting, we will have that.
Right.
We won't have to lay teachers off like we did 10 years ago. All right, anything else, Mr. President?
So the proposed action items, what I just mentioned, the bus replacement. He wants to replace 2007 8s and 9s and add an additional 8 special ed buses. So it's a total of 34. And after he did this memo to me, we got an email from the state, and you know how we sometimes get money from the state for one bus. We are getting $77,220 for a bus. So we'll come back to you for that one because he didn't include that in these numbers on the top. So tonight we just want to get approved the total cost of 34 buses, $4,708,552. Or next Tuesday.
I know we've already done some things to help with bus drivers and that thing. Is there any other ideas? I mean, I don't know if there's enough money to throw at the problem. You know what I mean? I don't know. I'm not suggesting we necessarily do that, but
Scott
I don't know who's
has-
going to drive all the new buses. You know what I mean? If we have a bunch of extra, they're just going to sit there if we don't have the folks there to do it. Can we?
Most of these are replacement
Yeah.
buses except for the 8.
They do.
What we've been doing, Andre and I have been working on is looking at our recent and looking at the top 3 for every job we want to be in the top 3 for every position that we have out of our RESA, which is basically Statesboro, down the east coast and some of the eastern part of Georgia, Effingham County, Chatham County, Bryan County, that we want to be in the top 3 on salary. So I think when we look at bus drivers, we're going to bump that up, especially bus drivers, custodians, substitute teachers, those folks that really make a difference.
In food service. And some of that can be taken care of by adding on a step to the salary schedule, but the bus driver scale actually needs a little bit more tweaking based on the first district RESA. We are the lowest, out of the top 3, we are the lowest for bus drivers. So we're going to look at definitely fixing that.
We're looking at every
And some of our substitute pay too. But we're looking at every job category, and we'll come back to you with, what we think we should do. The next thing I have is the Follett Destiny Resource Manager renewal, and we're actually upgrading it a little bit to get a inventory management system that's included with this. It's already in the general fund budget, so it's not anything new. And the upgrade for all schools is $50,640.77, and the second year renewal will be $31,244.39. And then the other thing I have is ERate. It's that time of year to approve our ERate contracts for our, it's at 80% discount, so we only pay 20%, and it's to get the internet access to the schools in Morningstar. We also have we have internet through the state, but we also buy an additional internet connection through ATC broadband. And then we're also upgrading the wireless access points in all the schools with ERate. Again, that's 80% discounted, so we pay 20% of the cost. Then the last thing I have is the video board. So I guess you guys know that the video board at the stadium is kaput, and GSBA is going to pay to replace it, but we have a $100,000 deductible. So I really wasn't sure if I needed to get board approval or not, so I'd rather do it than not do it and get caught by an auditor. So
yeah, during that process, Andy, we either had 2 choices. We could sue the video board people, or we could try to get insurance to pay for it. So Andy contacted Daktronics and worked out what we could.
They denied it.
Yeah.
GSBA denied it, said go after the company in North Dakota. But I went back to them, I told them their logic was flawed, and it's $249,000, and they're paying the $149 less than deductible. But that's, a new board would be $600,000-700,000.
no,
How much would a new one?
$264. It's the quote's $264.3.
For a new one?
Yes, $430.
Well, we're getting $149 from the insurance, so.
So they will pay the whole bill, and then they would end up billing us $100,000 for the deductible.
I'm sorry, I've been under a rock. I didn't know that happened. When did that happen? And
Sometime
Right when it was in the football season that it happened.
They found that out at the graduation.
yeah, Joel's graduation, it was all
But nobody knows from March till July when it happened. They hired a group that came down here and said that the Georgia the electric company said that within 48 hours of the graduation there was no lightning. But they forgot to say that there was nobody there from March to July. We had no maintenance people.
Right.
It never got turned on.
yeah.
So when I told them, did you check from March to July? Of course there's going to be lightning in Glynn County, which is why they said, all right, we'll
Yeah,
pay.
we were shut down, so nobody knows when it
See,
happened.
they were under the impression, well, somebody's turning it on every day. No, we had no idea from March till the graduation in July, the thing didn't work.
And of course, our warranty doesn't cover acts of
Yeah,
God.
warranty doesn't cover an act of God. So anyway, it's resolved, they're paying the $249 less than $100.
And actually, I talked to Steve Salmon today and told him we're going to take this out of East Plus 2 to zero it out. I think there's about $25,000 left in savings on East Plus 2, so I will transfer the balance from that local capital projects fund to put with the East Plus 2 money to zero that out finally. We bought it back in 2016 for $347,598, but part of that cost is the actual steel structure. So,
Any questions for Ms. Preston? Thank you, Ms. Now, Ms. Lewis, with the gifted program update.
Hello. I'm going to give you a packet, part of a presentation, and go ahead and turn to page 21. I promise you we're not going to go through the whole, the rest of it's for your leisure reading. I know you're excited. This is good stuff. We're going to give you an update on our gifted program. We really appreciate the board putting that in the resource gifted program for us.
Thank you.
And instead of me speaking about it, which you know I would love to speak for about 45 minutes to an hour, I brought the experts with me to let them share with you what's been going on. They're going to cover 3 areas for you. They're going to first cover the objectives and what the model actually looks like that we're using with our resource gifted. They're also going to talk to you a little about what it looks like for our virtual students. Last of all, they're going to share with you how do we know what we're doing in gifted works, or how do we know, or how are we evaluating what we're doing. So I'm very proud of our gifted resource program. I'm very proud of our principals for supporting this. Tonight we have Kim Hangers from Fatilla Marsh Elementary. We have Penny Tornaby from Greer, almost at a B, Greer. And we had Karen Knight scheduled as well, but unfortunately she had a family emergency to attend to, so we wish her well. But Kim's going to step in and do both her and Karen's part. All right? So, yeah.
Well, thank you for having us here tonight. We're very excited, and we have some awesome gifted students. So the first thing that we want to share with you is what we're doing, and we're speaking on behalf of elementary students. And so we are serving a resource model where we are pulling students out of the classroom, grades 2 through 5, for a full day of service. During that time, of course, we're addressing our Georgia standards, but we're doing it with enrichment activities and addressing the standards that were on page 21. And those are very brief standards. We've broken them down so the students understand them a little better. But there's 5 major areas that we focus on as gifted teachers: critical thinking and problem solving. We talk about research and communication skills, and we also talk about self. So those are the ones that we focus on through our enrichment activities. As I said, focusing on our Georgia standards. The content is differentiated, and it is to the degree of activities clearly not appropriated for our typical student at that grade level. So some of the areas, of course, is a content area, which we want to have complex and challenging subject matters. Process, our instructional strategies that we have designed. And I'm going to go a little bit into that in my particular speech in just a few minutes. Products and our environment, and of course assessments. So basically that's just the gist of our model that we're doing within the classroom resource pullout. And I'm going to turn it over to Penny, and then I'll be back.
And we shared that with you because we think it's important that you know that we're not just pulling things out of the sky or doing things that we want to do, or things we think we're going to be fun. We follow a state mandate that we take very seriously, so all our activities are centered around those standards. Penny?
Hey everybody, so I'm Penny. I'm at Greer, and Elizabeth Ruff and I are together. So we are 2 part-time teachers that are teaching one full position. So we share the position at Greer. We teach second, third, fourth, and fifth in person, but virtually we do first, second, third, and fifth for the elementary schools, and another teacher does fourth. So we're working to really challenge those children. We are trying to adapt what we're doing in our face-to-face classroom into the virtual format. So you're probably wondering, how are you doing that? We wondered how we were going to do it too. So, but we are accelerating their thinking and challenging them as related, like she said, to the gifted standards. But the specifics are of how we do it is really using what's in our Google Classroom. So, of course, on top of that is Google Meets, which we all know about. But we have different things that we use within Google, and we've learned so much this year that we didn't know was available. Some of the things we're doing, even with the virtual, because sometimes people are like, well, how do you do that? We're doing junior great books, which you know is higher order thinking. It's a reading comprehension program. We do critical thinking. You know, we have a lot of fun too with critical thinking. We do, you know, even Sudoku, logic problems. And a lot of people are, how do you do that? You know, how do you make that happen? Because some of the kids, you have never done those things. So if you've done Sudoku, you'll know teaching it to elementary students. It's easier if you're in person and you can point it like that. So we do use lots of digital tools, and one interactive tool that we have loved, and you've probably heard of it, is Jamboard. So on Jamboard, we can be on, you know, looking at our kids virtually and talking with them, and we have another computer over here, and it shows us exactly what they're doing. So I can hover over, and I might say, Sung-hee, do you see where I'm hovering? And she's like, yes, ma'am. And I might say, you know, read that to me. What, you know, look at your coordinate pairs, read it to me. They'll say, well, -7, -12. Oh, just like in the classroom when, you know, you're like, look at that. Because maybe they overlook that negative. So that's what worried me in the beginning, but we found ways to work around those things. So even though we can't be right there with them, it's close. It's almost as good. It's the next best thing. It's, I think, the best we can do to meet, you know, to be right there with them and those kind of things. Another thing that we're doing, we do a lot of STEM activities, which is where, you know, the kids make plans. We present a problem, they make a plan, they build and create, a lot of engineering. And then they make changes, they present, and then children give feedback, of course positives, but, you know, kids might say, well, you know, next time you do that, maybe you need weights in the bottom or whatever it is that we're doing. We've actually done that with our virtual kids. We weren't sure how it would work, but in the beginning, in January, we were doing, our whole unit was on snowflakes. So the kids were given the same rubric and the same directions as the face-to-face children, and they went off and made their snowflake, and they came back the next week and presented. Some of the kids that we have are actually face-to-face learners at Altama, but they come to us virtually on Wednesdays. So, I mean, they went home and did their thing, and they came back with it, and they shared. And because the children can interact with one another, they were able to see one another's work and ask questions and make suggestions and those kind of things. So we're really making it work. So those are some of the things we're doing to meet their needs, because some people are like, well, how do you teach gifted? You know, well, we're making it happen. So it's a little bit of what we're doing. And I will say there is nothing like face-to-face teaching. So, you know, remember years ago when we watched the Jetsons and you thought, okay, we're going to, you know, that's how it's going to be. And then it starts happening and we're like, oh my gosh, we're doing that. But you know, that is not, just so you all know, I mean, it's awesome for the children to be in the classroom with their peers and with their teachers. But we are making the most of this. So here's to hoping next year we're all back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so last but not least, we know gifted learners come to us with a broad knowledge base. So for this reason, it's very important for us to assess often. So in the two things that have been handed to you are more, basically are products They're an end result of our teaching and learning. However, on my first page that just came to you, those are some ideas of what we do to pre-assess. So a lot of times before a lesson, I do a quick activity to activate what they already know. And so I consider these activating strategies, and they include very traditional paper pencil sometimes. On the last page, you'll actually see some questions that are on a pretest from our stock market unit that we're teaching right now. I'm teaching that to 5th grade, and they're teaching me too. We're all in it together for sure. So we do some kind of pre-assessment. I do originally before the unit begins, so that I am not repeating things that they already know because of that large base of knowledge. In addition, this week I did a Kahoots with them with 16 questions, just to quickly assess where we were in our learning. Have we, I think we had 3 questions out of 16 that I was like, okay, we're not quite there yet on these 3 questions. So just quickly going back and assessing. Again, I don't want to repeat things that they already know. And I think that's important for our gifted learners. I also do things like a digital breakout on EDU breakout. And recently we did one on the national parks. And so it was a motivating activity. They were so excited. It's kind of like an escape room. They have 4 locks they have to unlock. But it was all about the history of the national parks. One of them was a map that they had to interpret. And so all of those things gave them clues on how to open the locks. And so that initiated my lesson for the day. Again, I get a pulse there. What do they know, what they don't know? Did you know the Everglades is a mountain range? That was interesting. I only had a couple that knew it was a swamp of sorts. So, it quickly lets me assess what they already know. And another one is just I link to prior knowledge and interests that they might have. And in this next activity, I would, just put up a map of I used the Grace Reef in Savannah, actually, and we talked about, where is this located on a map? We talked about, what do you know about coral reefs? And this Grace Reef actually is not a traditional coral reef. And so I was able to get some information from them about what they already knew. And so that kind of leaves me, those are kind of some activating things that we do in the classroom. Another one that I really love is a brainstorm carousel where I put questions around the room and they have to go around and answer the questions. And so then we take them down and we talk about how they answered the question. And again, it just gives me a good idea as to where we're starting. And then as we finish our lesson, I always have some kind of culminating activity. And that's what you're seeing a lot of in the packets. We do robotics, so obviously, can they create that? That's the first couple pages. We've talked about the Georgia coast and lighthouses, and they've built lighthouses, even with circuits that work. They love to create. Again, we do a lot of STEM activities. So what you see in your packet mainly, or the Google Slides, is mainly the end result. So they have to produce something. They're producing right now writing for me of 4 men that are sitting in the Jekyll Club when it was a Hunt Club, and they are talking about, we have Theodore Vell of AT&T, and we have Rockefeller of Standard Oil, and they have to tell me, what are they discussing at this table? And so it's a creative writing, but it's drawing in what they've learned about the history and the use of barrier islands over time. So those are just some examples of how we would also assess their learning at the end. Again, we've got to do that often and throughout the unit since they do have a great knowledge base. And we thank you for letting us share this with you today. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
After you finish, Hal.
Okay.
You're going to ask all 3 of you a question.
That, we wanted to bring this to your attention because we're thankful for you to support our resource gifting program. And every year, we try to make it better. So this year, 2 years ago, we started allowing them to collaborate together. So while every school does not do the exact same thing, they all have the same basket of units, of ideas to select from. So it's not like, before, when I was a gifted teacher, every school was doing their own thing, okay? No one knew what was going on, and there was no measure. So now, we're working very hard to making sure that we know where our children begin and where they end. Like she said, finished product is key. To make it better in the future, Mrs. Miller and Dr. Glynn will be working with gifted teachers to work on a different measure. The creativity measure, I think, is what we talked about, to revamping. We moved away from, in order to get gifted, back in the dark ages, we used two measurements that were checklists. So we moved away from that because it was so subjective. So we use the Torrance, which is nationally known, but however, we feel like it's hindering some of our very gifted children from getting in. But there is another way that we talked about getting those children measured in, and if they don't make it, that's fine, but it's actually hands-on product at the school. So we're chiseling away, we're reading research, and we're going to make it stronger. So we say thank you for supporting this, and we want to make sure it's fabulous. Any questions?
Yes, for all three of you, and just a summary. If you had unlimited resources and supplies, what would you do that would benefit the gift? What would you do for the gifted kids? Would you have a whole school for them every single day, 24/7? You know how I feel about this. You've only heard it for a decade from me, and I think that that is an underserved group to me. I'm not one that believes in, hey, well, they're helping, they can help the other kids. Well, they need to be helped as well in their particular need, and they're the ones that are going to change the world. Anyway, my point is that what would you do? Would you have a school? Would you keep them 3 days a week, 5 days a week? What would be your ideal gifted resource?
This is just like me. Back in year 2000, when we were closing Ballard Elementary, I begged our principal and the city superintendent if he would ever consider using Ballard Elementary as a resource gifted center, whereas every day we rotated students through that center and they stayed all day. And we would do like K1 and 2 for a couple of days, and then we do 3, 4, and 5 Winston, because we don't tap into the creative arts as much as we should. We were really good on the research base, on the researching and presenting, but we have a huge piece of the brain on this side that we have not tapped into. And it takes time, it takes equipment, it takes an atmosphere for that kind of learning. So I'm so glad you asked. But yes, you have to create the whole environment to get that type of learning.
And I would love that. I'll go. Yeah, the other thing really and truly, I know testing is expensive, but we do have so many children in our school system that are gifted, that are not identified. And it could be that they weren't paying attention. I mean, so there are lots of kids that need to be served, and I agree with you, there are a lot of kids falling through the cracks. And I feel like if we put a little bit more into that testing measure, then maybe there would be more children identified, and then maybe we would have such a problem that we have to come up with something for those children, like at school. That'd be great. Or at least one day. I'll take one day.
Just to expand on that, I feel like we kind of drop off in services after elementary school, and I think I might be one of the only ones that went to a school in a different district. So we did have through 8th grade. It's a little more difficult in high school to work that. At some point, I think that, like at a particular middle school, they had a robotics club, right? And it was really going in full swing, but the teacher moved out of that school, and now there's not one there at all. And so those types of same STEM or, just any of these critical thinking activities at that level, I think would do a great deal for these kids.
There's a whole area we haven't tapped into, like internships. We could do for our older kids, for gifted.
Wow, okay,
And there's lots of stuff out there that we haven't done.
Yeah.
It costs money.
But
They also
that's
earn-
right, everything does.
But they earn more FTE, 1.5 or whatever the number is. And the school in Miami, we had a planetarium, so it was a little bit different high school on the 6th floor. But I didn't hear your answer.
I would also say resources for sure. You were speaking about the robotics club, and we had someone gift our kits to us. and computers to code them. So I really believe that it has a lot to do with the things that we, even our resources that we have. I've reached out to several people and places. Is there an expert out there on that? Because I'll be the first to say that I'm a teacher of gifted students, but maybe not a gifted person, you know? But I tried very hard, and I learned with the students, and I think that's key as well. But I do think, you know, I wasn't even able to find anyone that could come in and help me with that robotics. So even having some kind of resources, digging deeper into, you know, experts in our area, because I try to tie almost every single lesson into our community. You know, what is here in our community that makes it special and that continues, you know, growing. And so, you know, just even have us a great list of resources. I would love a stockbroker to help me with the stock market. And I've taught it for 3 years, and I have grandmothers coming up to me now and saying, "Oh, my goodness, this nanny the other day said, my grandson just loves this so much. He's so into it. And now he's got us all looking at stocks and this, that, and the other." And I was like, okay, please. But, you know, I just feel like if we had some additional resources to help us even extend and enrich what we're doing would be really great as well.
What my vision has been would be to first of all have or the end game to have a school that was for gifted, period, that's it. And they go there, and whether you go 1 day, 4 days, or you're there every day, depending on where they are in the spectrum. That's been something that I would love to have seen here or see here. Anytime it comes up for a vote, I'm willing and very able and want to see that succeed. Because I think it's a community that is not addressed in a way that where they can get out there and you know, cure cancer before I get it. It'd be nice. You know, CyberKnife, you talk about the things that you do in robotics. CyberKnife at the hospital. There's a lot of things that the older kids can go out and see.
Absolutely.
At standby aviation. You know, there's lots for you to do to challenge that mind that, you know, as a kid, I used to sit there and just after 5 minutes I'm bored. And then what happens?
Well, and I
You get
told
kicked
my
out of
students
school for
today,
getting in
they
trouble.
said, that was a really hard
That's what it
puzzle.
is.
And I said, well, that's what I do. You're in your classroom, and you may already know, you know, 50, 75% of what the teacher is saying. My job is to make you dig deeper and think harder. And yes, it's not going to be easy when you come to me. I'm here to help. I'm here to facilitate. I'm not here to tell you the answers. I'm here to, as a resource to help you find those things and grow as a learner.
And I see differentiating in the classroom, but I also see it would be a lot nicer to be at that level for those children to truly challenge the high group. So I'm here to promote as much as I have for a decade to please push it. And I will certainly do it as well.
Well, it's been my dream job. I do. I love teaching what I'm teaching, for sure.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Haywood, has a discipline update?
Good evening.
See all of you. So tonight we were wanting to provide a discipline update for you all. I think the last time that we were able to provide a report was in the summer of 2019. So we thought it was important that we kept you abreast of what was happening with discipline for our district. So the second slide will show you, we'll start first of all looking at our elementary totals. Because of schools stopping in March, actually it was March 16th of 2020, we thought it would not be fair to try to compare this school year. We wanted to make sure we were comparing apples to apples. So what you're seeing is the total number of referrals by school from August of 2019 to March of 2020 and August of 2020 to March of 2021. And so overall, we have seen an overall decrease in our discipline referrals. As you can see from the blue side is the 2019, 2020, and green is the current school year through March the 15th. And if you'll go to the second slide, our middle school numbers have dropped significantly as well. And just looking at the data, we believe a lot of this is attributed to the COVID safety regulations and precautions that we've put in place. We've minimized the number of transitions between class periods. We've also decreased the capacity during lunchtime and in the mornings. So we believe that this has had an impact. Of course, also having students virtual the first part of the year has also attributed. And if you look at our high school numbers, you'll see another huge decrease. And what we found interesting is that the majority of our referrals at the high school are attendance related. So these numbers are really much smaller than what you see. And we wanted to also look at our programs. If you look at the next slide, it will show you our Career Academy, our alternative school, and Coastal Academy. And then looking at the GLC numbers, enrollment has been down this year, which I think is a direct correlation to the decreased discipline in our schools overall. And I wanted to take some time to celebrate as well. If you look at the next slide, the number of students in our schools, the percentage of students in our schools that have no discipline, and to see that that number has increased from the 2019-2020 school year to this school year. Just exciting to see that we have, the majority of our kids don't get into trouble. That's our elementary numbers. The next slide will show you our middle school, and you'll see that same trend. And finally, our high school numbers on the next slide. The next slide is just an overall tribunal level offense total by grade span. I want you to see that that number has also decreased, and again, attributed to decreased discipline in our schools. We're not seeing as many students through the tribunal process. And the final slide just shows you of the number of tribunal offenses that we've had this year, shows you a comparison from August of 2019 to March, and again, from August of this school year to March the 15th. And so we'd like to do, again, another update for you, of course, at the end of the year, but wanted you to just have an idea of where we are relative to last school year and where we are now.
Any questions for Ms. Hayward?
I just have a comment. I mean,
Yes,
it
ma'am.
stands out. So, I mean, our biggest offense is drugs.
Yes, ma'am.
Are we finding those from drug testing, from drug dogs? What?
Well, I'll tell you what I think what we're finding is students having drug paraphernalia on their person. We have, through the dogs, have located a couple of situations, but most of them have been in bathrooms. I was very concerned because it's very glaring.
Yeah.
But I have two, just in research and in talking with our schools, the pandemic has had a tremendous impact on our students. And we are seeing an increase in addictive behaviors, not just substance related, but also behavioral. When you think about social media, think about gaming, kids are out of school for 5 months. And while we would like to think that our kids have been supervised during that time, a lot of kids have not been. And so unfortunately, we've had students that have gotten into behaviors that are not appropriate for this age. And so we are dealing with it as best we can and providing support to those students as well.
Mention what you mentioned to me the other day about them getting it.
Yes, sir. The other thing that we have also realized is students have increased access and means to marijuana. And I mean, when we think about, there are 8 states in the United States where it's been legalized. Florida, it's decriminalized. We found out through an investigation at one of our schools that they are able to order it online, and it's shipped from California. So those are just, unfortunately, we're dealing with not just those addictive behaviors, but we're also dealing with the fact that they have more access now than ever before, just because of the legalization that's happening across the nation. So,
Thank you.
absolutely, absolutely. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you all so much. Thank you, Dr. Spence.
Thank you.
And then, Mr. Tootin. Mr. Goodwill is out of town this week, so Mr. Tootin will be providing the report. Also along with Mr. Tootin will be Mike Blackerby, who is going to be taking Mr. Boudreaux's position later in July.
Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Can you pull up a chair, Mike, really, please? Thank you.
The first project on the list is the Glynn Academy PE addition. That project is going smoothly. The site utility work is complete. They've begun importing fill material and demolishing the existing buildings. So that project is moving according to schedule. Altama Elementary replacement, we got an updated schedule from the contractor today. He is showing a June completion. We're pressing them on that. We're having weekly meetings and monitoring that schedule as best we can. Mr. Boudreaux has reported that the crosswalk at Altama is in process by the Glynn County, and that Glynn County is going to repaint the crossing at 303 from Waverly Pines at the traffic signal. St. Simon's Elementary, we're proceeding with documents and planning on that project. I have a meeting with McKnight Construction relative to schedule and procedures Monday morning. As you know, we've presented previously the fact that we're going to attempt to get site demolition ready in the summer, rearrangement of utilities and those things necessary to start the new two-story classroom building, and hopefully we can begin construction on that portion of the work about the end of August. We have 3 renovation and modification projects, roofing at Needwood only, and heating and air conditioning, lighting, painting, floor coverings, and hardware and other renovations at both, or all 3, Needwood, Golden Isles Elementary, and Oglethorpe Point. And those documents are in production. I had a meeting today with Lavender and Associates to update work on those projects. We have produced the roofing documents for Needwood, and that roofing work is being priced now. And the status for Golden Isles Elementary is that the building will be vacated during the construction, and the contractor thinks that a December completion of that is achievable. Needwood and Oglethorpe Point will be more difficult than that, in that they will be phasing that work while school is going on. There's no way that it can be completed this summer, so the target date for completing Needwood and Oglethorpe Point is the end of summer 2022. And I think that covers.
Yep. The good report. You guys have the good report. So. Any questions for Mr. Tootin?
I have one.
Okay.
Are we having to make budget adjustments due to construction material pricing fluctuations?
I'm sure that we will. Obviously, we're concerned about material prices and also scope of the work. And as you know, the State Department of Education only pays for a portion of the work. And we are accomplishing some work that was not in the original budget at each of these kitchens. There's some kitchen equipment. There's going to be some infrastructure changes due to that. But we're working on a budget, and we will present you with a guaranteed maximum price of each of these projects as quickly as we can get to that. The other problem that we're facing at St. Simon's in particular is due to the extent of that project going over 3 separate phases of construction, that the last phase will be completed maybe 2.5 years from now, won't be begun until the two-story classroom building is scheduled to be completed the end of the summer of 2022, and then the other construction would only begin then after that building is occupied. And prior to that beginning, there'll be additional demolition work of removing existing structures. So we will have to agree on a guaranteed maximum price and then target to meet that price or bring to you the reasons that something has changed that we can't. But we will address the budgets and get the initial budget projections to you as quickly as we can.
Thank you.
Question from Mr. Toots?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a few more items. First of all, the proposed zoning changes for Alabama. You want to pull that up? This is where we're at as of right now. Can you make that hair bigger? So right now, if you can see the current school where the kids go, that's the total number of students that live in those neighborhoods and the proposed changes. So basically you're dealing with Waverly Pines, Fairway Oaks, and the Kendall. Those kids going from Greer and Gold Mouse to Alabama Elementary. And then Beverly Shores and College Park, they go to Alabama Elementary now, but they will continue going there and be bused to Alabama. So that's where we're at right now. Dr. Simmons called me today and said that he has some other ideas, some spot ideas to kind of even out the numbers so that maybe we wouldn't have to transfer teachers to Alabama to cover the kids. But that's where we're at right now. Definitely we want, Waverly Pines, Fairway Oaks, and the Kendall going to Alabama because they're walking to that school. They're within walking distance. But that is not something that we're just talking about that way. Any questions on that? We're going to look at individual numbers to see. We want to make sure that the schools stay balanced and that the numbers stay relatively close to the same. All right. Center for the Arts. The attorneys for the USGA are currently negotiating with Andy concerning the IGA and the wording. There are still some points that we're not agreeing on, and so Andy's going to work with them to make. He knows what we want, and before we present it to you, we want to make sure it's complete and the wording is accurate, and that we're getting what we say we need, because there's still 2 or 3 things that we're not agreeing on.
Well, and to Ms. Sam's point a minute ago, I mean, we're already talking about a scaled back project that's gonna cost more now. It just is.
That's
I mean,
correct.
Everything's just more expensive, and I don't know when it's gonna turn, but, I don't think we've ever had an agreement take this long, Andy. I mean, I don't understand, but maybe a sign, I don't know.
Give them a month.
And we keep giving them,
You can give them till Tuesday if you want to.
try that.
Down on proposed action items, the naming of the VHS Road and Fieldhouse. I have some documents up there. They presented last month to name the road and the Fieldhouse after Coach Willis. According to our policies, we can do that because it is not the actual school; it is within the school. And then our policy also states that they need to tell us the things that the person has done in the community and for the people in the community, and I think they have outlined that in those documents. And then we have some facilities that are already named for people: Frank Inman Field, Adam Wainwright Field, and Bud Couch Field at Brunswick High School. The key thing to remember about those is in each instance, that's not been paid for with school system funds. It's been paid for with money that they've raised. Of course, Adam and Jenny Wainwright paid for that, and C.C. Allen paid for Frank Inman's plaque out in front of Glynn County Stadium, and the Brunswick High Foundation paid for the Bud Couch. So that if we do approve this, then I think that we need to continue the practice of, if we do approve naming a part of a facility, a part of a facility or a road or something after someone, that private funds be used to pay for that. So I'll be asking that we approve that. Virtual learning teachers, I do want to continue with virtual learning in our middle schools next year. Our high schools are capable of doing so through Edgenuity and Georgia Virtual. Our middle schools, I would ask that we have 4 additional teachers, 1 at each middle school, that can do Edgenuity. just so that we can continue virtual learning for several reasons. And that would only be for the 1 year. We would not make this a situation where we're going to keep those teachers forever. We would go 1 year, and then maybe the next year if we wanted to continue with it more. That's what I would request there. And then Ms. Seals has some additional staff that she's going to request.
Good afternoon. Good evening. Ms. Preston's already kind of talked about some of our positions that we're looking at adding for next school year, 2 of which are special needs students, and of course we look at the numbers in regards to what we need with special education, and a social worker. A while ago we had an additional social worker. We'd like to add that person, and have that, especially with the pandemic, we have really seen an increase of need to really help our students. They offer a lot of support to our parents and to our students and our schools. So we're looking to help kind of even the work around a little bit, if you will.
We're going to add that back. We used to have that position and we dropped it.
School psychologists, that's again a need from our special education department. We're trying to address the testing and the retesting that has to be done in order for students to qualify and continue to qualify for special education. At Risley Middle School, she's talked about that, splitting the reading and the writing. This is the last year for that. We'll be adding 2 to 6th grade, so that'll be able to split reading and writing at all 3 grade levels at Risley Middle School. Gifted program, again, numbers. The gifted program, in particular OPE, we're seeing an increase in numbers there. And Dr. Spencer just talked to you about 4 virtual teachers. In our elementary schools, we've seen a rise in a couple of our schools. So we're in need of 2 more elementary school homerooms. And she's already talked about the assistant superintendent for next year.
Any questions for Ms. Seals? Thank you very much. That is all I have.
That brings us down to the other, I guess. We had other, executive session. Anything you want? Guess I entertain a motion to go into executive session for land, legal, personnel, and tribunal review.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Sims. Can I get a second, please? Second. You gave me the second, Ms. Gibbons?
Yes, sir.
Gibbons, second. All those in favor? Is unanimous at 6:39. session.
So moved.
Moved by Dr. Yergin, can I get a second, please?
Sure.
Mr. Dalla, gets a second. All those in favor? We're back in at 7:35. Time motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Dr. Yergin gets that one as well. Second, please.
Second.
Ms. Gibbons, all those in favor? It is unanimous at 7:34.
Y'all have a happy Easter.
Happy Easter, everyone.